thank you for coming back. We are joined now by Matt McPhail, who is the Global Director of Systems Engineering for Scale Computing.
That's correct. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming back to our studio for a second day. You were on
Of
our live
course.
stream yesterday, so that's always good to see you back. So this time we want to talk about some slightly different topics than we did yesterday.
Yep.
First, we want to talk about your partner community. You guys did some interesting things with CRN this year. You got some pretty good kudos.
Yes. So CRN has been running the ARC initiative.
Keep going.
As far as looking at each of the different partners and allowing them to choose the best partner when it comes to virtualization and hyperconvergence. And they've been doing this survey for 34 years. And specifically, it's traditionally been owned by larger vendors.
I see the list.
Since 2009, VMware has won every single year except for one in 2014.
That was Microsoft.
Correct.
That's a big company too.
Another fairly big company from the understanding. So what we were able to do was we were able to take a list of partners and we were able to allow the partners to choose based upon what they felt was the best subcategories. And each of those different subcategories for the ARC award allowed for a major category to be awarded to a specific vendor. We won almost every single subcategory, which allowed us to qualify for winning the major categories of not only virtualization solution, but also hyperconvergence.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much.
So what were some of the criteria that you had to meet in order to be able to, who voted? What was the criteria? How did this happen?
So first of which, you had to get at least 75 partners to be on your side. You wanted them to vote well for you, obviously, and you wanted to ensure that you qualified in each of the number of different subcategories. Ease of use, completeness of functionality, the ability to have actual good service and support associated with it, and each of those subcategories would then roll up into the major categories for each of the two awards that you see there on your screen.
That's awesome.
In some of the categories, we expected a higher showing from some of the other vendors, and we were very pleased to see that we were number one across almost every single subcategory as well.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that it comes from you guys are a good group of people to work with, first of all.
That's the goal.
So I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, I would imagine. And not to mention the technology that underlies the whole thing. I mean, Scale has done some pretty impressive things. In fact, it's a lot of times SMB solutions just keep flying under the radar. People don't, because you always hear about the really big enterprise plays and stuff like that. And Scale has always been one of those companies with big aspirations, and they're capitalizing on that now. That's actually coming to fruition, and it's really good to hear that that it's being recognized by your peers, by your customers, by your partners.
Well, thank you.
All that good stuff.
We never wanted to be a dumbed down enterprise solution. We wanted to be a smart solution for mid-level enterprise and SMB. Absolutely,
and you have always been that. So that's great that that's being recognized.
Yep.
So let's talk about HCI on Scale. I mean, obviously, when we're at VMworld right now.
Yep.
We're live right now. It's happening right outside this studio.
Right.
You obviously don't play necessarily there because you're not VMware centric. You have a KVM base that has provided you some interesting opportunities for your customers and for your platform. Tell us about sort of how customers make the migration from what they're running today to a Scale environment.
Great question. So obviously we're not there because in 2012 when we launched here at VMworld here in San Francisco.
I was there and remember that.
We weren't asked back because we were asked, how can you do this on VMware? Like, well, to do true HCI, you can't. There are trade-offs when it comes to certain aspects of HCI for you to be able to run on closed source hypervisors like VMware or Microsoft. So the migration piece, though, is easy. I mean, the open virtualization format has been around since 2008, and that's allowed for any virtualization vendor to run any other virtualization vendors' VMs on their platform with just a simple conversion. So that standard's been wonderful when it comes to migrations, and there are obviously a number of tools depending on the amount of downtime or the amount of conversion data that you want to have to do in order to move over, but it's really simple. So for anyone out there that's listening or that is worked with other vendors in the past and they think they got lock-in, it's really not that case. It's not like that these days.
Well, you know, one of the big VMware's big claim to fame for over the years has been some of the feature set. Now, if we focus primarily on vSphere right now, but it's got things like DRS, and we've got, you know, the ability to VMotion and all this other good stuff, right?
Yep.
What does that look like in the scale world?
It's something that comes standard. So VMotion is something we've had since the very first version of our hyperconvergence product. It's not called VMotion, it's just a simple live migration. And when we look at things from a technology perspective, DRS, that's actually inherent to some of the clustering technologies that we've already got built in. Storage VMotion you don't need because you've got a clustered stack of storage, so it becomes redundant. DRS you don't need because you've got intuitive, efficient self-healing algorithms that are there to ensure that everything is taken care of without a script to move VMs around. So a lot of what's expected out of a virtualization product is going to come standard when you're looking at a product like ours, and then a lot more is just going to be redundant, such that you don't need an Enterprise Plus version and all the features and bells and whistles that it has. What you need is just the infrastructure.
And one of the nice things that I like about Scale is the simplicity goes to both the technology as well as the buying process.
Yeah.
I don't have to go through a whole bunch of SKUs to figure out, okay, I need this feature but not this feature, and then try to make a value determination around every individual feature and whether or not I need it.
Yep.
I just get it.
Yeah, you get 3 SKUs on our line card. That's about it. Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about Scale is you're very upfront with your pricing. If you look at a lot of solutions out there, I mean, sometimes you used to have your pricing actually public on your website, and you can still get that. Sometimes it's hard to get pricing from vendors, and that's always frustrated me.
Well,
like I guess the adage goes, if you have to ask, you can't afford it, but sometimes you just need to have an understanding of what the budget needs to look like, and to understand if you can even think about it.
Yeah, from our background, we're a bunch of IT folks. We're mid-level IT folks. I ran an IT organization for a small and medium business, and so did the other founders of the company. And we look at it from the perspective of, if you have to ask, it is truly too expensive. And if I'm one guy going to my management looking for a budget, I better know what that budget is, or the money's going to go elsewhere, or purchasing is going to come in, and purchasing is going to say that that's not going to happen. So for us, we always want to be upfront about that. We want to be the good guys when it comes to being able to get information to the customers or any of the infrastructure out there.
So something that's happened recently is you've gone, Scale as a company has gone deeper into virtual desktops. You have a new partnership with Parallels.
Correct.
Tell us what that looks like, how it works, and what it means for customers.
Absolutely. So part of our initiatives are around expanding core. And what expanding core means is the core value of hyperconvergence. And we talked a little bit about edge previously, but core truly is the foundation of what we're looking at when it comes to what you can do in a hyperconverged environment. And part of that core expansion is around virtual desktops. So we realize that the ecosystem needs to expand. And we understand that there are really good solutions out there, like Parallels, that allow us to expand it. So Parallels is excellent when it comes to us being able to take their technology, roll it out to virtual desktops, yet still focus on our core, being able to leverage their technology not only for the virtual desktop environment, but for the ability to do a pseudo multi-tenancy environment for MSPs, and moving forward into other compliancy-based solutions that allow for data to stay in a certain location without worrying about any breaches that occur across different and various endpoints. Parallels is great for that.
So how does that solution integrate with Scale? Is it, I mean, as a customer, how do I leverage this? Is it something that rides inside the Scale environment? Is it something that's a SaaS play that integrates with the Scale environment? How does it work to deploy desktops onto Scale via Parallels?
It's actually a hybrid of both. So when we look at partnerships, and we've got a number of them these days, we actually look at either being able to do a full API-based deployment, a combination of API and SaaS like you're talking about, or just strictly let's meet in the marketplace and find a complementary solution that works. So where Parallel fits is kind of in that middle where they do have some hooks into our API just to allow ease of use for the end users, but also we're meeting them in the marketplace and allowing them to pitch us, and we're pitching them and making sure the solution works great for both of our customers. So that just pushes VDI forward for the people that really didn't want to move onto the VDI solution because it was necessarily too complex or it just didn't fit the budget range that they had.
So there, a lot of VDI environments we have to deal with brokers, and Parallels is handling all that for you.
That's
so
correct.
all of the VDI constructs are being handled by
yes.
gateways, brokers, all that good stuff to look to handle the pooled resources or dedicated desktops, things like that. As a buyer, what am I buying? How am I buying it? Am I buying it as a package solution? I think you said that it goes multiple ways. You could buy the. Am I buying Scale and then buying Parallel separately? Is it a joint buying process? How does that work for a customer?
From a buyer, what I recommend and what we really tout is that we're always going to be 100% channel friendly. So we want to take care of our channel partners just as much as we want to take care of our customers. So if you're a buyer, go to your channel partner, make sure that you're getting a not only Scale PO and specifically line items for Scale, but you're also getting a Parallels one as well. And if the channel partner is there and they're a very good value-added reseller, they're going to help you with both. So we can still give recommendations, and we're always good as far as giving recommendations, but leverage your channel partners, make sure that they are taking care of you, because they will.
Perfect. So we talked about VDI, we talked a little about your fantastic success with your partners.
Yeah.
There's also a new partner, Lenovo.
Correct.
You've launched the HC500 small line, basically a new line of small appliances. And when it's interesting to hear small appliances because Scale already had small appliances because of your footprint, but you've gone even smaller. And I think that's good. In fact, I did write a paper for you guys recently called, going small to get big.
Right. It was really good.
I believe that because you guys have done some interesting things with this small appliance form factor. Can you talk about the partnership, what the appliance looks like from a technical standpoint, the speeds and feeds, and the what that's going to enable for customers?
Yep. The Lenovo partnership's been great. It's been absolutely great, where they've come in as a true OEM that has worked to help us, to grow us. They've not only dedicated sales resources towards us, but they also, like you said, are working on specific hardware lines that will help us out in specific areas. Now, the HC500 is meant to be one of those specific areas where it allows us to focus more on edge. It allows us to focus more on smaller SMB customers, but also we've had a number of customers come back to us and say, you know what? We love your product. We've got incremental budget. How can we expand our business using the limited resources that we have, but yet still be able to do what you do? It's like, we've got a perfect solution for that now. It's the HC500. You can use that with your existing Scale infrastructure, and that's been part of our business prop from the very beginning. Is you're always going to be able to mix and match. You're always going to be able to leverage existing software. You're always going to be able to get good support. HC500 actually expands upon that and leverages that in a very good and unique way.
That's awesome. So one of the things that the reason it works is because of your system footprint, your architecture.
Yeah.
If we look at a lot of HCI solutions on the market, they're using a VSA, a virtual storage appliance. It's a virtual machine that manages all the local storage. And those require a lot of resources to handle some of the heavy lifting that has to happen around data reduction and just knowing where everything lives. How does the scale architecture compare? I know that you don't use a VSA. That's why I'm asking.
Yep.
To these VSA models, and why does that make it so much more efficient?
So, just to set the record straight, the VSA model is there so that you can have flexibility in your hypervisor.
Absolutely.
That is the only reason why it needs to be there.
Correct.
Other than that, it is not efficient. And the reason why we went down the path of just in-kernel KVM was that we wanted to be as efficient as possible. We saw that we were selling primarily to small and medium businesses and to mid-enterprise, and they had limited budget, they had limited IT resources, and they needed to purchase what they were going to use. With our platform, because we have KVM embedded, we can leverage a very small footprint, less than 1/10 of a core, less than 4 gigs worth of memory, in order to ensure that it actually will work well, and that, more importantly, what's being purchased is being able to be used, unlike having to use the VSA model, which takes overhead and takes resources away from what the purchase is.
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking at a graphic. Looking at this chart. I can't show it to this audience right now, but it's basically shows other providers using basically having a 24 gig overhead for the VSA, and you've got
minimum.
A minimum, yeah, as is a minimum. I've seen them go much higher than that. You guys are at 4 gig, which means that when you start talking about a 32 gigabyte appliance, and that's just RAM, then you can do some interesting things, especially with some of the edge stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the 3 servers that have tons of RAM and just to support small workloads that are critical to an edge environment, for example. You can have 3 servers that are much smaller with 32 gigs of RAM that can actually legitimately get the work done. And so multiplying this across hundreds or thousands of environments, and on a single environment, it's not that big a deal. But when you start to think about this multiplied across huge scale, that could have some pretty significant benefits for customers, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could run these on Intel credit card computes. You could run these on a set of computers that are sitting underneath this table right now, and the entire studio could be in an environment that is fully functional in HA. You can run these, and we've got them across the world in retail locations, because prior to this, they had no other options. It was a physical POS device that if it went down, they're done. Now they actually have true HA. They can push out applications into their environment, no matter where it is across the world, upwards of a cable modem connection, or in some third world countries, ISDN still. And they've got everything that they need still. And as we were talking about yesterday, now you've got a proactive approach to being able to handle IT at these disparate edge style deployments. And customers have options. Finally, they have options where they didn't have before.
That's fantastic, and it doesn't mean that they're losing capabilities either.
No, not at all.
So from a
gaining them.
From a data protection standpoint, let's say you've got 1,000 stores somewhere, you have a centralized cluster that handles all the data protection pieces. All those clusters synchronize, however often they synchronize, even across slow connections, because it doesn't matter. And things just work. You don't have to worry about putting in place a separate data protection scenario for all this stuff. It just basically becomes one big infrastructure.
Right. I mean, you remember this back in the day when the cloud term was coined, because you're basically talking about just other people's servers.
Absolutely.
You're running on other people's servers. Edge now is just running on servers that are outside the data center of the cloud. That's all the terminology means these days. So for you to be able to do that, you're talking about lower footprint, but anyone can do that anywhere, any location now.
So we have a question. So does scale help small scale industries use products even if it takes, I'm not sure what this means, even if it takes low quality architecture? I guess they probably mean that if it's not the best environment. So tell us a little about how some weird environments might be a great fit for scale.
So let me bring up a lumber mill. I won't say the name just to protect the IT person that's associated with it. This lumber mill obviously is dealing with a very dirty industry. And that's okay because we need the infrastructure that is associated with the lumber industry. But all of the mechanics behind it has to be on the floor where everything is getting cut. It's just typical to that environment. Well, lower quality doesn't necessarily mean has to go down. You have to have a specific failure, because in that environment you can't. But
right.
Here you've got boxes that are getting sprayed with anything from dust to debris to just anything that's coming off the saw. In an HA environment that's at the edge, it doesn't matter. You're just going to replace one node and the rest of the cluster is going to continue to run. And your machines that are making your business are continuing to run because of that. And that's the way it is across any business, if it's manufacturing or if it's healthcare, or anything that requires a uptime that's associated with either dollars or lives. We can handle that in any small location, and it just works great.
Just a reminder to our audience, please ask questions using the questions panel in the InExpo screen. We want to make sure we take your questions live. We have some great people in our studio today, so please ask questions. In fact, questions are good. So what's Scale's largest VDI deployment right now?
So right now we've got a deployment that is upwards of 1,500. And I mean, when you look at that from a VDI deployment, it's nothing compared to a federal government one.
Oh, but it's still impressive.
It's still, when you get above about 50, you start getting into issues when it comes to deploying VDI, maintaining security around VDI, justifying the cost associated with it. And so for us, we've been able to mitigate a lot of that through services offered, through lower cost, the acquisition time of being able to run them quicker, and just end-to-end user experience, because that's number one what's going to probably tank a VDI environment is someone in accounting comes and says, I'm sorry, I can't do payroll as quick as I used to be able to do.
Yeah, that's one thing. I think one of the reasons so many VDI projects had so many problems early on was because if a server slows down, you can kind of hide it.
Yep.
If a desktop slows down, there's no hiding it.
Not at all. Especially from specific users that are in a pilot group, and those users can really hurt a pilot quickly.
Our next question, so basically, does the edge service, the edge device that you provide, is it using x86 or ARM processors is the question the person's asking.
Great question. So at this time, there's no reason why we couldn't do ARM, but it is on x86 right now, just because that's the underlying kernel and where it works really well.
And the application side too.
The applications that are going to come with it. And there are equally amount of really good x86 small compute and really low form factor as there are at ARM today. ARM's great. We certainly are looking into that.
So that's possibly something coming later on.
Possibly. That's what I can say.
Okay. Well, that's always interesting to hear. So when we look at, so the largest robo deployment. So when we talk about small stuff, it gets big. So what's and I know the answer to this, but I want you to tell us, what's this largest robo deployment you have?
I mean, we're working with customers all around the world, but we're working with a specific customer that's over 9,000 deployments. And part of the reason is because they're measuring their budget in how many tomatoes they're selling, or how many people are walking through the door at these retail deployments. It's not in application dollars or what the business is doing. It's truly on the slimmest of margins. So for us to be able to get in there and own it from an operational perspective, that's huge as well.
And I think people don't realize that grocery stores have single-digit margins.
Single-digit on everything.
And things like that. So it's important that they manage costs wherever they can. And that doesn't just mean that the hardware was inexpensive. It means that the services that the ongoing maintenance and operations have to be on point too.
Yeah.
So tell us about how that works in an edge deployment with Scale.
Well, when we were doing the bake-off for this particular customer, the bake-off was not just on what the capital expenditure was on the specific line of hardware that they were getting plus the software. It was on, all right, how many hours are we going to have to be working on this? How many times do we have to go through an upgrade? What's the maintenance?
And
What's
who does
the
the
training?
upgrade?
Who does it all?
Yeah.
So they calculated in 60% of what they were doing as operational costs as well. Well, our operational costs are actually down lower than that. So they were able to take a savings on our operational costs because there was no training and HA was already included and they could go on a proactive cycle associated with it, as opposed to the other people who were in the bake-off.
Another question. Does HC3 have network virtualization and microsegmentation capability?
That is a great
It
question. So that is something that is currently being explored. We have had a lot of customers ask us about that. Interestingly enough, in the SMB and mid-market, it's not been as big of a push. So it's something that we've got working, but it's...
You have it working with GCP, right? The network virtualization piece, but not
Correct.
microsegmentation yet.
Correct. And where we see that as rolling out as even more and more important is going to be in the coming months and years as we roll out the more edge deployments in interesting locations where it may be in a DMZ location or it may be outside of the physical four-wall network and it's not connected at all. So we do a number of deployments where it's dark side deployments.
Right.
And it wouldn't have to be, except for the security situations that each of these dark side deployments would be. Microsegmentation, where we see truly benefits around software-defined networking, it is going to help us out with that as well.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the other big thing is you'll see when NVMe becomes more apparent that the amount of bandwidth that is now going through each of the different devices is going to allow for microsegmentation to be that much more justifiable.
Absolutely. Matt, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for dropping by the
Thank you,
studio
Scott.
again today.
I appreciate it.